when Sophia Lane rushed out of the first aid tent. Blood was still pouring from my left arm. The gauze was already soaked through. Blood ran down my wrist and struck the ground. One drop, then another. Beside me, Nurse Mia Carter pressed hard against the wound, her voice tightening with alarm. Dr. Lane, Evan needs stitches now. Sophia did not look back. Her eyes were fixed on Lucas Grant across the training field. Lucas sat on the steps, pale-faced, both hands clamped over his ears. He was not bleeding. Nothing was broken. He had not even truly lost consciousness. The blast from a demonstration charge had triggered a trauma response. Sophia shoved aside the tent flap. Keep pressure on Evan's wound. Lucas can't be left alone. I watched her walk away. In that moment, I did not even have the strength to call after her. When the metal support frame collapsed, it did not merely tear open my flesh. It tore through the marriage I had spent 7 years teaching myself to trust. Mia gritted her teeth and pressed harder. Don't move. The ambulance is 6 minutes out. I looked up at the security camera mounted beside the field. Its red light was on. That day was an open training event jointly hosted by the Harbor Light Foundation and the Military Rehabilitation Center. I was Harbor Light's founder. Sophia was the physician in charge of on-site medical care. Lucas was the recently retired veteran she had personally recommended as a trauma support consultant. Half an hour earlier, he had been standing on stage giving interviews. He told the press he had found his way out of the shadow of war. He said he wanted to help other veterans rebuild their lives. Sophia had stood beside him with a light in her eyes I had not seen in years. Evan, Lucas has been through a lot, she had told me. Don't be too rigid about procedure today. I had simply nodded. I thought she meant his late arrival and his last-minute changes to the demonstration plan. I had not realized she was talking about my life. By the time the ambulance arrived, Sophia was still beside Lucas. She was crouched in front of him, holding his hand. Lucas looked up as the paramedics lifted me onto the stretcher. His gaze slid away. Sophia finally turned. The moment she saw the blood covering my sleeve, her expression changed. But she did not run to me. She only called through the crowd. Evan, go to the hospital. I'll come by later. I looked at her. No need, I said quietly. She seemed not to hear me. What? I did not repeat myself. The stretcher was already being pushed into the ambulance. As the doors closed, I saw her standing exactly where she had been. And suddenly, I understood. Someone does not have to travel far to leave you. All they have to do is choose someone else when you need them most. The ER doctor put 27 stitches in my arm. The gash ran from the outside of my upper arm to the back of my elbow. It had missed the major artery and spared the nerves. The doctor said I was lucky. I stared up at the surgical light with only one thought in my head. So this was what my luck looked like, being saved by a doctor who was not my wife. Mia had ridden with me in the ambulance. She stood beside the hospital bed, her eyes red. Evan, I'm sorry. I shook my head. You have nothing to apologize for. She placed a copy of the on-site emergency care report on the table beside me. I followed protocol. I recorded the exact time Dr. Lane left the first aid tent. I looked at her. Aren't you afraid? She lowered her head. I am. But I'm more afraid that another injured person might be abandoned like that. The report existed because every joint Harbor Light event required a medical log. Copies were retained by the on-duty nurse, the Rehabilitation Center's medical office, and the Foundation's safety team. Mia had been the nurse on duty. She was required to record what had actually happened and provide a copy to the event organizer. The report could prove that Sophia, the physician responsible for the site, had left her emergency post after I was injured. It could not prove she was having an affair, but it could prove that when duty and personal feelings collided, she had made a choice. I told Mia to go home and rest. As soon as she left, Sophia called. I let it ring. She called 3 more times. I answered the 4th. Her first question was, "How bad is it?" I looked at the bandages around my arm. 27 stitches. She was silent for a beat. I didn't deliberately abandon you. Lucas's condition was different. He has severe post-traumatic stress. Was he more urgent than I was? Her voice tightened. You can't compare the two that simply. He was at risk of hurting himself. I closed my eyes. There was a crisis counselor on site, 2 nurses, security, but there was only one physician responsible for stopping the bleeding and arranging treatment. My calmness seemed to cut her more deeply than anger would have. Evan, are you interrogating me? No. I'm confirming something. What? Whether Harbor Light should still let you control its medical initiatives. The other end of the line went completely still. Sophia's breathing grew heavier. What is that supposed to mean? The Foundation is suspending every medical grant that has not yet been dispersed. That includes the Overseas Prosthetics Project under your supervision and Lucas's trauma recovery program. The board will decide what happens after a full safety and compliance review. Her voice turned cold. You're using the Foundation to threaten me? I looked at the floor stand beside the bed. It isn't a threat, I said. It's stopping the bleeding. Harbor Light was not a toy I could use to punish my wife. It was another kind of legacy left behind by my brother, Noah Shaw. Noah had driven evacuation vehicles in a combat zone. 8 years earlier, he was wounded while transporting injured soldiers to safety. He did not die on the battlefield after coming home. He died during the 3rd month of waiting for approval for rehabilitation equipment. At the time, I was only a project manager at a medical device supply chain company. That was when I first learned that some people survive war, only to be worn down by paperwork and delay. Later, I sold my share of the royalties from a patent and founded the Harbor Light Foundation. What we did was not glamorous. We bought wheelchairs, subsidized prosthetic limbs, funded trauma treatment, paid for temporary caregivers for veterans' families. Sophia joined Harbor Light in its 2nd year. Back then, she was one of the few physicians in the military medical system willing to stay up until midnight completing administrative forms. She did not make stirring speeches. She simply sorted every patient file by risk and worked through them one by one. I fell in love with her because she once told me, "The wounded aren't heroes in a story. They're people who hurt, get scared, and run out of money." I thought we saw the same world. After we married, she became the volunteer director of Harbor Light's medical committee. I handled fundraising and supply chains. She handled medical evaluation. Together, we grew the foundation from a tiny office into an organization capable of partnering with a military rehabilitation center. So freezing those funds was not an angry impulse. I had to follow procedure. That evening, I emailed Mark Ellison, the chairman of the board. I did not mention that Sophia was my wife. I described an on-site safety incident, a physician leaving her post, an injured participant, the emergency care record, security footage, and the financial risk. Mark called almost immediately. "Evan, are you sure you want the freeze? Only on undispersed funds. We can't stop anything already contracted if it would interrupt a patient's treatment. But Lucas's new trauma recovery camp and the overseas procurement project Sophia approved personally need to be suspended." Mark was quiet for several seconds. "You know this will anger the rehabilitation center." "I know. And you know Sophia will accuse you of mixing your marriage with foundation business." I looked out at the darkness beyond the hospital window. "If I ignore it, that's when I'll be mixing the two." Mark sighed. "Send me everything. Emergency meeting at 8 tomorrow morning." After we hung up, I finally became aware of the pain in my arm. It hurt badly, but I did not call a nurse. I opened my phone and changed Sophia's contact name from Home to Sophia Lane. The moment I saved it, the pain was sharper than the stitches, because I had removed her from my home with my own hand. Sophia arrived at the hospital the next morning. She wore her military medical uniform, her hair pulled back so tightly that she looked as though she had come to resolve a formal complaint, not visit her husband. She set a bag of breakfast on the bedside table. "Why wouldn't you wait for me to explain?" I glanced at the cold sandwich inside. "You had all night." Her expression hardened. Lucas was in terrible shape. He couldn't stop shaking. I couldn't leave him. "But you could leave me?" She froze. Only the soft beeping of the monitors remained in the room. "You weren't in mortal danger," Sophia said in a low voice. I slowly looked up. The words were like a blunt knife. Not sharp enough to cut cleanly, but more than capable of grinding through the softest part of a man. "So you made an assessment," I said. "You knew I was bleeding. You knew the wound had not been closed. You simply decided I could wait." Her lips lost their color. "I'm a doctor. I made a medical judgment." I nodded. "Then the Foundation will make one too. Someone who allows a personal relationship to interfere with on-site duties should not continue approving medical initiatives alone." At last, she snapped. "Evan, Harbor Light doesn't belong to you alone." "Exactly. That's why I turned it over to the board." She stared at me. "This is because of Lucas." "I'm not denying that. You recommended him. You opened a fast track for him. You let him bypass the background review and enter the trauma recovery program. Then you abandoned an active casualty for him." "Of course I'm investigating." Her voice chilled. "Lucas is a veteran. He needs help. Needing help does not give him the right to bypass every safeguard. She lifted her chin. You weren't like this before. You used to trust my professional judgment. I met her eyes. Your professional judgment never put me in a hospital bed before. For the first time, panic flickered across her face. She reached toward my bandaged arm. I moved away. Her hand stopped in midair. Evan, it's not that I don't love you. The words stirred nothing in me. She was not talking about what she had done. She was talking about what she believed she still possessed. I'm not going to argue in a hospital room, I said. My attorney will send you the divorce papers. All the color drained from her face. You want a divorce? Yes. Because of one incident? I looked at her. Not because of one incident. Because this one finally made me stop inventing excuses for all the others. The problems between Sophia and me had not begun with the blood on that training field. Once Lucas Grant came back into her life, the pattern became impossible to ignore. 3 months earlier, Sophia had mentioned him for the first time. She told me Lucas had been her boyfriend while they were stationed at a field hospital. During an evacuation, his unit suffered heavy casualties. He had spent years carrying the guilt of surviving. He's had a terrible life since then, she said. Evan, he isn't a bad man. I believed her. I even went with her to meet him at the airport. Lucas wore an old jacket, and his right hand trembled constantly. When he saw Sophia, his eyes reddened. He did not hug her. He only said, You still came for me. Sophia said nothing, but I saw the tenderness in her eyes. Later, Lucas said he wanted to build a peer support program for veterans. Sophia wrote his recommendation. I reminded her that foundation projects required a 3-month background review. He can't wait that long, she said. A lot of people can't. I did not reject him outright. I had the team prepare a 2-month temporary consulting contract instead. He was not allowed to meet high-risk patients alone. He was not allowed to promise treatment outcomes on Harbor Light's behalf. Those clauses existed for a reason. Psychological trauma treatment could not be built on passion alone. Military service was not a professional qualification. I had kept a copy of the contract. The Foundation's legal department had retained the emails. Lucas had signed every page. They proved that from the beginning. He knew exactly where his authority ended. It did not take him long to cross the line. On social media, he began calling himself Harbor Light's trauma mentor. He brought Sophia into promotional photo shoots. He stopped patients in the rehabilitation center's hallways and drew them into conversations about his own experiences. Once, Olivia Pierce, the program director, reminded him that he needed signed patient consent forms first. He replied in front of everyone, Forms like yours have killed more people than they've helped. Sophia covered for him. He's just upset. I was there. I did not challenge her publicly. After the meeting, I simply had Lucas's limits restated in the written minutes. Looking back, I had not been overreacting. I had been giving my marriage one final chance. On the 3rd day after my injury, Olivia sent me a file. Lucas had requested a $200,000 advance for his trauma recovery camp. The budget listed venue costs, mentor fees, patient lodging, and transportation subsidies. 3 of the vendors were newly registered companies. All 3 listed the same responsible party address. Olivia had been preparing to return the application for clarification when Sophia signed the medical necessity approval. The money had not yet been released. Now it was frozen. The evidence existed because every Harbor Light project over $50,000 required a budget, vendor documentation, and a medical necessity opinion. Copies were held by the program department, finance, and the board secretary's office. As founder and executive director, I had authority to conduct a compliance review. The documents could not prove embezzlement, but they did prove that Sophia's review of Lucas's project had been unusually lenient. That was enough to begin an audit. I stared at the vendor records and realized the blood on the training field had only exposed a deeper wound. Sophia assumed I was acting out of anger. She sent message after message. On the 1st day, Don't drag our marital problems into the foundation. On the 2nd, Lucas's program can genuinely save people. On the 3rd, by freezing it, you're only hurting veterans. I did not answer a single one. Every message circled around the same fact. Lucas was not the only person who had been hurt. The Foundation's temporary board resolution went out through the internal email system. All new, undispersed projects were suspended for 10 business days. Lucas's trauma recovery camp entered a special audit. Sophia was temporarily recused from medical committee votes. Subsidies for patients already in treatment would continue without interruption. The decision was restrained. It was also clear. It destroyed no one. It simply forced everything back into the proper process. For Lucas, process was the greatest enemy of all. That afternoon, he came to the hospital while a nurse was changing my dressing. He stood in the doorway, pale. Evan, I'd like to talk. I let the nurse continue. Go ahead. He glanced at her. Could we speak alone? No. Humiliation flashed across his face. I know you hate me. But you can't punish people like me because of this. People like you? His mouth tightened. People ruined by war. I studied him. There are many people ruined by war. Not all of them use their wounds as an all-access pass. His eyes changed. You've never been in combat. You don't understand. I lowered my sleeve. My brother died after the rescue system failed him. You're right. I don't understand your battlefield. But I understand the difference between needing help and exploiting it. His voice dropped. Sophia was only trying to save me. Then you should see a doctor. You shouldn't steal one. His face went white. Mia looked up from beside the bed. She had understood exactly what I meant. At last, Lucas stopped pretending to be gentle. Do you really think she'll leave me? He asked. She owes me her life. She spent all these years waiting for a chance to repay the debt. I picked up my phone. I'm going to remember that. He saw that I was recording and immediately changed expression. You're recording me? You came into my hospital room and initiated this conversation. I'm protecting myself. He turned and walked out. The recording could not prove fraud. It could not prove Sophia was unfaithful. But it proved one thing. Lucas knew exactly how much guilt Sophia carried. And he knew exactly how to use it. Once the divorce agreement was sent, Sophia finally understood that I was serious. She stopped sending long messages and came directly to my apartment. I had already been discharged, though I still could not put any strain on the injured arm. When I opened the door, she was standing in the hallway with a bag of medical supplies. I came to change your dressing. I did not let her inside. The community nurse already came this afternoon. I'm your wife, she said quietly. And the doctor who walked out of the first aid tent that day. Her face went pale. Do you have to talk to me like this? I'm only putting the facts back where they belong. She stood there for a long time. Evan, I admit I was wrong that day, but divorce is too severe. What would be severe enough for you? I asked. Waiting until I went into hemorrhagic shock? Waiting until Lucas's project received the money? Waiting until every rule became optional whenever he was involved? She shook her head. That isn't what I did. I walked to the table and picked up a printed document. This is the medical necessity opinion you signed for Lucas's project. You wrote that group intervention had to begin immediately, even though he doesn't hold full clinical credentials. This is a screenshot of him calling himself Harbor Light's trauma mentor online. And this is the email you sent after the program director requested additional documentation. I read the sentence aloud. Exceptional veterans may begin practice before completing documentation. Sophia's expression worsened with every page. I was only trying to move the project faster. His project. She did not argue. After a long silence, she said, he saved my life. For the first time. She told me the full story. During the evacuation of the field hospital, an explosion went off outside the medical supply depot. Lucas shoved her clear and was pinned beneath a vehicle. 3 members of his unit died. Sophia survived. Lucas disappeared from her life for years afterward. She had always believed she owed him. I listened without interrupting. It explained why she had lost her balance. But an explanation was not a pardon. You owe him gratitude, I said. Not my safety, not the Foundation's money, and not your duty as a military physician. Tears finally spilled down her face. I know. No, you don't. If you had known, you wouldn't have walked away that day. Her mouth opened, but no words came. I placed the divorce agreement on the small cabinet by the door. Sign it or don't. I'm continuing the process either way. She stared at the pages as though she had only just realized I was not waiting to be comforted. Lucas changed tactics. He stopped coming to me directly and went to the media instead. An article appeared on a local veterans forum under a striking headline. Foundation founder freezes veterans' mental health program over marital dispute. The article wasn't signed, but it contained detailed information about when Harbor Light had suspended the project. It also described Lucas's trauma episode during the open training day and claimed that the Foundation's founder had responded with cold accusations. I read it and did not react immediately. Mark called. This looks like it came from Lucas's side. Tell public relations not to answer emotion with emotion. Release 3 facts. First, all previously committed patient subsidies are being paid as scheduled. Second, new projects were suspended because of an on-site safety incident and compliance concerns. Third, Harbor Light is inviting an independent auditor to review the matter. You're sure you want the audit public? He moved the battlefield into public opinion. The only way to put out that fire is with documents. A public audit was not designed to humiliate Lucas. It would expose me to pressure too. Donors would ask why Harbor Light had not identified the problem sooner. The Military Rehabilitation Center would worry about its reputation. Sophia would be placed in an even more difficult position. But without transparency, Lucas could continue presenting himself as the victim of a jealous husband. 3 days later, the independent audit began. I recused myself from every internal interview involving Sophia. She was still my wife. She was also the volunteer medical director under review. I could not be both the injured party and the judge. Piece by piece, the evidence came together. The 3 vendors Lucas had submitted shared the same registration address. One of the supposed venue providers was an empty studio company owned by his college friend, Ben Harper. The lodging budget covered 40 people for 10 nights. The actual enrollment list contained 12 names. One line item listed payment to an outside trauma consultant identified as A. Grant. That was Lucas's sister, Abigail Grant. She had no counseling license. The records existed because every advance and reimbursement request required corporate registration details, quotations, descriptions of service, and beneficiary lists. Copies were preserved in the finance system, the program mailbox, and the independent auditor's evidence package. Once the board authorized the audit, those materials were lawfully obtained. They proved that Lucas had inflated the budget and failed to disclose related parties. They did not prove he had already taken the money. He had not. I had frozen it first. But they did prove that, without the freeze, Harbor Light might have funded a non-compliant project. For the first time, public opinion shifted. People began asking a different question. Who was really using veterans as a shield? After Sophia read the preliminary audit report, she did not contact me for an entire day. At 2 in the morning, she sent a message. Evan, I need to see you. I did not reply. A second message followed. I'm not asking you to stop the audit. I need to add what I know to the report. I told her to contact the audit team, not me. She did, this time. She did not shield Lucas. She provided several emails in which he had repeatedly bypassed the program director and asked her to certify that his budget was reasonable. Sophia, if even you don't believe me, I don't know who I have left. In another, he had written, I'm glad you survived back then, but part of me has been trapped there ever since. The emails were skillful. They never directly asked for money. Every line simply reminded her of the debt she believed she owed. Sophia had once read them as pleas for help. Now she finally saw the manipulation. When she turned over the emails, Lucas panicked. He called her. She did not answer. Then he sent a message. You're betraying me too. Have you forgotten how I saved you? Sophia submitted that message to the auditors as well. That was the true weight of evidence. The villain did not suddenly confess. Every text, budget line, email, an irregular exception Lucas had left behind in his attempt to control the situation finally locked together. At the same time, the Military Rehabilitation Center began its own internal review. Not because I pressured them, because an injured man had suffered delayed treatment during their open training event. Mia's emergency care report, the ambulance arrival time, the first aid tent footage, the medical dispatch recording. Together, they established that Sophia had left her post. The military medical system was not going to punish her casually because she happened to be my wife. Nor would it condemn her simply because I had been injured. The question was whether a more reasonable option had been available at the time. Its conclusion was measured. Sophia had shown a serious lapse in triage judgment, and failed to maintain priority treatment of an actively bleeding patient until responsibility had been formally transferred. She was no longer considered suitable to serve as lead physician at Joint Foundation events. Her field medical duties were suspended for 3 months, and she was required to repeat training in triage and trauma response management. The outcome was not theatrical. It was realistic. She was not fired overnight. She did not vanish from military medicine, but she lost the qualification she valued most. Not because I took revenge. Because what she had done that day was wrong. Sophia's regret came more slowly than I had expected. At first, she believed the injury had made me irrational. She thought freezing the Foundation's funds was merely a way to force an apology out of her. Then she realized the project was actually being audited. She became angry. She felt I had laid her professional dignity on a table for strangers to examine. Then the preliminary findings came out, and she finally understood that Lucas was not merely a wounded man. He calculated. He packaged himself carefully. He knew how to turn other people's sympathy into a resource. But it was not the falsified budget that finally broke her. It was Mia's testimony. Dr. Lane did not appoint another physician before leaving, Mia said. She only instructed us to maintain pressure on the wound. Evan Shaw was conscious, but the blood loss was obvious. If the ambulance had been delayed, the risk would have increased. Sophia's face turned white as she listened. Later, she told me that was the first moment she stopped remembering the training field from Lucas's side. For once, she stood beside me. She saw me sitting on the folding cot. She saw the blood covering my sleeve. She saw herself turn and walk away. She called. I did not answer. Then she sent a voice message, her voice hoarse. Evan, I didn't choose Lucas instead of you that day. I just thought you were always so steady. You always managed everything on your own. I saved the recording, not to use against her later, to remind myself. Sometimes people hurt you not because you matter too little, but because they have grown too dependent on your strength. So dependent that they forget you can bleed. 10 days later, the final audit report was submitted to the board. Lucas's project was cancelled. Harbor Light placed him on its do not engage list. The portions involving inflated expenses and undisclosed related parties were referred to council to determine whether the foundation should recover the cost of the audit. The 12 veterans who had already enrolled were transferred to legitimate trauma treatment programs. Harbor Light continued paying for their care. I insisted on it. People who genuinely needed help should not be forced to pay for Lucas's misconduct. Aren't you worried people will say you're still being soft? Mark asked. The foundation isn't a weapon for revenge, I said. It exists to pull people out of other people's mistakes. As soon as I said it, exhaustion washed over me. I could still be fair to injured strangers. I could no longer trust Sophia. Sophia eventually signed the first draft of the divorce agreement. She changed only one clause. She refused the property settlement I had offered her. The down payment on that house came from the patent money you sold before Harbor Light was founded. She said. I shouldn't take it. Her attorney reminded her. You are legally entitled to a share of the appreciation that accrued during the marriage. I know, she said. I don't want it. Her refusal did not move me enough to reconsider. It merely made me feel, for the first time, that she was beginning to understand what it meant not to take what was never hers. We had no children. Our shared assets were uncomplicated. The house remained with me. Her military benefits and retirement accounts remained hers. The joint account was divided according to the transaction history. The foundation was not part of the settlement. Harbor Light was an independent nonprofit entity. Sophia had served as its volunteer medical director, but she had never owned any part of it. After the papers were signed, she sat motionless in the conference room at the law office. Did it hurt that day? She asked. I looked at the scar that had not yet fully faded. Yes. Her eyes reddened. Why didn't you yell at me? Because I was trying to stay alive. Her fingers clenched. The answer weighed more than any accusation. I'm sorry, she whispered. I accept your apology. She looked up, and a faint spark of hope appeared in her eyes. Then I finished. But I do not agree to remain your husband. The hope went out. She did not cry again. She simply nodded. I understand. During the mandatory waiting period before the divorce became final, she mailed me a small box. Inside was Noah's old dog tag, which she had kept all these years. I used to leave it on the nightstand in our bedroom. During a renovation, she had put it away in a drawer. There was a note beneath it. I once thought I was saving Lucas. Now I understand that I dragged the foundation Noah left behind into the debt I believed I owed. I'm sorry. I took out the dog tag and wiped away the dust. That night, I dreamed of Noah. He was sitting in the old evacuation vehicle. Are you still going to keep doing this? He asked. Yes, I told him in the dream. But this time, it would not be to prove who deserved saving. It would be because this was what I had wanted to do all along. Lucas did not disappear quietly. After the audit report was released, he sent me a long email. He said Harbor Light had destroyed his chance to rebuild his life. He said he had only wanted to make trauma treatment more humane. He claimed the vendors were friends, and only friends would have agreed to help at a reduced price. At the end, he wrote, Evan, you will never understand people like us who came home from war. I did not respond. My attorney sent a formal letter on my behalf, ordering him to stop fundraising under Harbor Light's name. stop using the Foundation's logo, and preserve all records relating to the false statements in his budget. A few days later, one of our donors sent us a promotional flyer. Lucas had started a small project of his own called Second Dawn. A faint remnant of Harbor Light's old logo was still visible in one corner. This time, Mark did not hesitate. The Foundation issued a public statement immediately. It did not mention that Lucas was Sophia's former boyfriend. It listed only the organization's name, the terminated partnership status, the limits of Lucas's former authorization, and the associated risks. That was due process. No personal grudge, no public abuse. Only facts placed where everyone could see them. Lucas's fundraising stalled almost at once. He called Sophia. She did not answer. Then he waited outside her residence building. Sophia called the police. She told me about it later. I replied with one line. Keep yourself safe. It took her a long time to answer. Thank you. That was all that remained between us. Courtesy. The Military Rehabilitation Center revised its partnership procedures as well. From then on, every outside consultant recommended by a foundation had to pass separate reviews by both the center and the foundation. No outside consultant could meet a high-risk patient without a licensed professional present. At on-site events, the lead physician could no longer be responsible for both psychological de-escalation and emergency medical command. The rules looked cold on paper, but they had been purchased with my blood and Mia's refusal to stay silent. Mia was later promoted to on-site medical coordinator. She messaged me after the new procedures were approved. The policy passed. Congratulations, I wrote. Not to me, she replied. It means no nurse will ever have to hold pressure on a wound alone, wondering when the person in charge is coming back. My scar throbbed as I read the message. A lot of people believe satisfaction comes from watching someone crawl. For me, the real victory was seeing a serious mistake survive the excuse that it had been understandable. Someone made the mistake. Someone accepted the consequences. Someone changed the system. And the next person might bleed a little less. On the day our divorce became final, Sophia wore civilian clothes. Her wedding ring was gone from her hand. She placed it in a clear plastic pouch with the signed documents and offered it to me. I don't know whether I should keep it. That's for you to decide. She looked down at the ring. You used to say Harbor Light wasn't built to memorialize death. It was built to help people keep living. I nodded. I did. What about our marriage? I thought for a long time. It helped me live for a while too, I said. But now it's making me bleed. Her tears fell instantly. This time, I did not offer her a tissue. She took one from her own bag and wiped her face. If Lucas had never come back, would we have been different? Lucas only brought the problem to the surface sooner. You put guilt ahead of me and responsibility behind procedure. If it hadn't been him, it would have been something else. She did not argue. Sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps. Outside, some people carried flowers in to register their marriages. Others walked out in silence with folders under their arms. Sophia stood beside me like someone who had finally emerged from the smoke of a battlefield. But I could no longer be her evacuation vehicle. I'm going to retrain, she said. I'll take the assessments again. And I'm starting therapy. That's good. She watched me. You're not going to ask whether I'll ever see Lucas again? I shook my head. That is your boundary now. It is no longer my marriage. A bitter smile crossed her face. You really have moved on. I did not say yes. Moving on was not a single moment. It was resisting the urge to pick at the scar every time it itched. It was reminding myself, whenever Sophia sent a message, not to mistake courtesy for reconciliation. It was hearing Lucas's name, feeling my chest tighten, and no longer needing to prove that I had won. At the bottom of the steps, we went in opposite directions. She turned left. I turned right. There was no embrace, no final kiss, only two adults returning each other to the places where we actually belong. 6 months later, Harbor Light held its winter prosthetics delivery event. This time, no critical step depended on a personal relationship. 3 independent physicians cross-checked every medical evaluation. Vendor quotes were filed for open review. Transportation subsidies went directly into the patient's accounts. The emergency tent had 2 doctors, 3 nurses, and a crisis counselor. Everyone knew exactly where they were supposed to be. Before the event began, Mia finished checking the emergency kits and waved at me. Evan, stay away from the metal supports this time. I glanced at the scar on my left arm. I'll keep 10 yards between us. She laughed. So did I. Mark stood beside me. Donations are down 17% from last year. That's expected. The audit made people cautious. Do you regret making it public? I shook my head. Transparency is expensive. Rot is more expensive. That day, a young veteran received a new prosthetic leg. He stood and managed 3 steps. On the 4th, he nearly fell. His wife rushed forward to catch him, but he raised one hand. Let me do it. I stood outside the crowd and watched him take that 4th step again. I thought Noah would have liked the moment. Not the applause. Not the cameras. A man taking back the weight of his own body. As the event ended, I received a text from Sophia. I passed the retraining assessment. I'm back on an emergency department rotation today. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Congratulations. She did not say anything more. That was good. She had finally stopped presenting every improvement as a reason I owed her another chance. And I had stopped treating her progress as my responsibility. That night, I changed the final line of Harbor Light's annual report. It had originally read, "Lighting the way for everyone changed by war." I replaced it with, "Leaving a reliable path for everyone who still wants to live." Reliable was a word I had learned late. Love could be passionate. Guilt could be overwhelming. Good intentions could be moving. But anything that truly saved lives had to be reliable. So did a marriage. So did a doctor. So did a foundation. When someone is hurt, what they need is not a person who says they love them. They need someone who stays at the post they were trusted to hold. A year later, I saw Sophia again in a corridor at the Military Rehabilitation Center. She had just come from the emergency department. Her cuffs still smelled faintly of disinfectant. We stopped several steps apart. She spoke first. "Evan." I nodded. "Sophia." Her eyes moved to my left arm. "How has it healed?" "It aches when it rains." Her expression dimmed. "I'm sorry. You've already said that." "I know. But when I see you, I still need to say it." We did not discuss Lucas. I later heard he had left the area. Second Dawn had failed. He had taken a position as an ordinary volunteer at a small rehabilitation organization. No title. No foundation endorsement. No Sophia clearing the way for him. Perhaps that was the first genuine beginning he had ever had. Perhaps it was not. His ending was no longer mine to chase. Sophia told me she now attended a weekly ethics group for trauma responders. "Guilt is not an order," she said. "Fear is not a triage standard." "That's good." She looked at me. "Are you still alone?" "Yes." Something flickered in her eyes. But she did not step closer. She did not ask whether we could try again. "I hope your life is peaceful," she said. "I hope yours is too." We passed each other. When I left the center, a light rain was falling. My scar did ache. I opened my umbrella and did not look back. Noah's old dog Tag was in the car. On the passenger seat were the audit documents I had to deliver the next morning. Life did not suddenly reward me with a new love. It did not crush everyone who had hurt me. It simply returned things, slowly, to where they belong. Sophia returned to her post. Lucas lost the authority and admiration he had never earned. Harbor Light kept helping the people it was meant to help. And I stopped using marriage to prove that I was not alone. Rain tapped against the windshield, one drop at a time, like blood striking the ground that day. But this time, I was not lying there waiting for someone to come back. I gripped the steering wheel and drove out of the parking lot. The streetlights ahead were not blinding. They were simply clear enough. I thought Noah had been right. A person could not survive forever by waiting to be rescued. Sooner or later, you had to carry yourself away from the scene. The following spring, Harbor Light received an anonymous thank you letter. It was brief. The writer said he had once enrolled in Lucas's trauma recovery camp. When the program was cancelled, he was transferred into a licensed group therapy program. At first, he had hated me. He believed I had cut the rope keeping him alive. Only later did he understand that real treatment was not a circle of deeply wounded people tearing one another's scars open. "Thank you for not handing us over to someone who was drowning too." I read the letter 3 times, then placed it in the file for the annual report. It mattered not because it proved I had been right. It mattered because it showed that procedure, however cold it might appear, sometimes stood between danger and people who had no voice. At the quarterly board meeting that day, Mark proposed establishing the Noah Shaw Safety Reserve. Every new project would be required to set aside 5% of its budget for risk management. Some directors considered it too conservative. Others worried donors would dislike seeing money held in reserve. When I spoke, I chose my words slowly. Good intentions cannot be allowed to operate on luck. Before money can save anyone, we have to make sure it won't harm them. The proposal passed. Not unanimously, but by enough. After the meeting, Olivia placed a new project file on my desk. Its lead applicant was a young physician named Grace Miller. Her documentation was complete. Her credentials were clear. Her budget was so cautious it was almost clumsy. Olivia smiled. She's afraid you'll audit every comma. I smiled too. People who fear the process usually respect it. That evening, I drove past the training field where I had been injured. The old metal supports had been replaced. The emergency tent had been moved. A blue sign now stood beside it. The lead physician may not leave until an actively bleeding patient has been formally transferred. I pulled over and studied it for a long time. The scar on my left arm looked faint in the sunset. A year earlier, an ambulance had carried me away from that field. A year later, the lesson remained there in writing. People left. Love changed. Guilt lied. But a lesson written into policy could not as easily pretend that nothing had happened. I rolled up the window and drove on. Real departure was not forgetting the pain. It was turning that pain into a hole someone else would never have to fall into. Sophia sent me one letter after that. She did not ask to reconcile. She did not explain Lucas. Inside were photocopies of 3 handwritten pages from her retraining notes. The first covered triage principles. The second covered trauma response protocol. The third was her own reflection. I used to place stable people at the back of the line because I assumed they would never fall. Now I understand that stability does not mean the absence of pain. It only means they have not yet had the chance to ask for help. I read the letter and put it in a drawer. I did not reply. Not out of cruelty. Her work was no longer mine to grade. Several months later, Mia told me about a night shift during which Sophia had treated 3 injured people. One was a veteran she had known for years. Another was a delivery driver she had never met. The driver had a penetrating abdominal wound and needed immediate care. Sophia treated him first. The veteran became agitated and accused her of being heartless. She did not waver. She handed him over to the crisis counselor and stayed with the driver until he entered surgery. This time, she held her ground, Mia said. By the time she finished, the coffee in my hand had gone cold. I did not feel so relieved that I wanted to go back. I only knew that the line once drawn in my blood had finally remained uncrossed. That evening, I organized the drawer at home. I found Noah's dog tagged beside the divorce decree. Beneath it lay an old photograph of Sophia and me. She was wearing a white coat. I was carrying a carton of new wheelchairs. We both looked exhausted and happy. I studied the picture for a long time, then placed it in a different box. I did not tear it up. I did not burn it. Someone you once loved does not have to become garbage. They simply cannot remain somewhere your hand reaches every day. I closed the lid. The apartment was quiet. An ambulance passed the end of the street, its siren fading into the distance. I remembered staring at the ceiling lights inside the ambulance that day. At the time, I thought I was losing Sophia. Only later did I understand. What I had truly lost was the ability to think of her as safe. What I had taken back was the right to stop storing my safety in someone else. On Harbor Light's 5th anniversary, the foundation did not hold a gala. We used the money to buy 2 new patient transport vehicles for the rehabilitation center. Mark said it was not dignified enough for an anniversary. Noah never cared about appearances. I told him. Mia cut the ribbon at the delivery ceremony. She was no longer the nurse who had held pressure on my wound with red-rimmed eyes. Now her voice was steady, her instructions precise. She stood at her post like a nail driven deep. "Evan, are you still afraid of event sites?" she asked. I looked toward the emergency tent. "Yes, but being afraid doesn't mean I stop showing up." She nodded. "Exactly. Fear is why we write the process down." After the ceremony, I went alone to Noah's grave. I placed the annual report against the headstone. The anonymous thank you letter was tucked inside the final page. The wind lifted one corner, so I held it down with a stone. "Noah, the foundation is still here," I said. "So am I." I sat for a long time. I did not cry. I did not say much. As I was leaving, Sophia sent me a text. "I heard today's delivery went well. Congratulations." "Thank you," I replied. A second message appeared. "Evan, I hope reliable people stand beside you from now on." I read the sentence. This time, it did not hurt. "I hope you become one of them." I wrote back. She did not answer again. The sun sank, washing the road outside the cemetery in pale gold. I drove back toward the city. As I passed the training field, one of the new transport vehicles was pulling through the gate. The Harbor Light lighthouse emblem was printed on its side. A lighthouse was never meant to keep ships tied to shore forever. It only showed those still caught in the storm where direction lay, and where the rocks were. Sophia and I had both lost our way. Lucas had tried to make other people carry his darkness. But in the end, everyone had to tend their own wounds. Everyone had to answer for their own choices. Everyone had to walk their own road. My left arm tightened lightly against the steering wheel. I did not release my grip. The traffic light ahead turned green. I pressed the accelerator. This time, no one walked away while I was bleeding, because I had already carried myself away from the place where I once waited for her to turn back.